No Small Endeavor is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy to see if you could save when you bundle your home and auto policies. Try it at progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states. Hey there. Did you know that we have a newsletter? Just imagine if you could have one of your favorite ethics professors send you a list of things to reflect on, think about, practical actions with which to experiment, all on your way to sorting through what it might mean to live a good life. Well, that is the NSC Notebook. I riff on themes and topics related to the show and our guests. Sign up for my NSC Notebook today at nosmallendeavor.com/newsletter. Hello friends, Lee C. Camp here. You're listening to No Small Endeavor. This is our unabridged interview with Phil Vischer and Skye Jethani, co-hosts of the Holy Post podcast. Many will know Phil as the co-creator of the VeggieTales series, very comedic, entertaining storytelling of the Bible. Phil is the voice of Bob the Tomato, among other vegetables. And Skye Jethani, a pastor and a co-host, as I said, with Phil of the Holy Post podcast. Fascinating interview about their work of cultural critique and the role of humor in that work and the way they think about doing the critiques that they have done, which often gets them much praise and much criticism. Fascinating interview. Enjoy. A few weeks ago, our manager sent me a new sponsor proposal by a company called Quince. So I dutifully went to check out their website, and before I knew it, I had already made my first purchase. My lovely wife, Laura, had told me I was embarrassing her the way I was dressed when going to the Y. So I found the perfect navy performance tech shorts that would have cost me 2 to 3 times more at the store where I had considered getting some gym wear. And now I'm so pleased. I'm waiting on my new summer shirt to come in, along with some European linen drawstring shorts. Quince has all the things we actually want to wear, like organic cotton silk polos, those European linen beach shorts, and comfortable pants that work for everything, from backyard hangs to nice dinners. Plus, they have high ethical commitments in manufacturing practices, a commitment of which I'm especially fond. And yes, the good stuff keeps coming. Everything with Quince is priced 50 to 80% less than what you'd find at similar brands. So yes, I am a new fan of Quince. You can elevate your closet with Quince. Go to quince.com/endeavor for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's Quince, QUINCE.com/endeavor to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/endeavor. Enjoy. I just recently learned about Thrive Market. Thrive Market is like your favorite health food store, but online and way more affordable. So I was quite excited to get our first box from Thrive. It was full of premium brands, all delivered to our door, and up to 30% less than what you would pay at traditional stores. And their site is super easy to shop. Everything they sell is non-GMO and meets incredibly high standards. They actually ban over 1,000 ingredients that are still allowed in U.S. products. You can even stock up on wellness essentials like magnesium, omega-3s, and herbal teas. It's not just food. Thrive has supplements, household items, and clean beauty too. And the shipping is fast and carbon neutral. Plus, when you sign up, you get to pick a free gift worth up to $60 with your first order. So skip the junk without overspending. Head over to thrivemarket.com/endeavor to get 30% off your first order and a free $60 gift. That's thrivemarket.com/endeavor. thrivemarket.com/endeavor. Hello, friends. One of the things I've taught students for many years now is that one of the most important things they can do is pay attention to their meta habits, big habits that leave lots of things in their wake, and that this is key to living life well. For centuries, the cardinal virtues were thought of as just such meta habits. Profound practices that have a disproportionately large impact upon your life. The 4 cardinal virtues: courage, temperance, prudence, and justice. They were considered essential to a good life, but today we hardly talk about them. Most people can't even name them. That's why we're launching a special 4-part series exclusively on NSE+. In this series, I'll take a deep dive into these virtues, what they mean, why they matter, and how they shape a meaningful life. Think of it like a private college course, except it's way practical. Join us on NSE Plus to start listening today. sign up at nosmallendeavor.com and click Join NSE+. Phil Vischer and Skye Jethani are two of the most influential voices in Christian media today, bringing humor, wisdom, and some sharp cultural insight to conversations about faith. Phil, perhaps best known as the creator of VeggieTales, used a talking tomato and cucumber to introduce biblical storytelling to millions of families. Skye is an award-winning author and former Christianity Today editor, has spent his career seeking to move others to a deeper, more thoughtful faith. Together, they co-host the Holy Post podcast, where they tackle faith, culture, and current events with both depth and a whole lot of fun. Welcome, Phil. Welcome, Skye.
Thank you. Welcome. Welcome to me.
Good.
And you.
Good to have you guys here. Joining us from Chicago.
We prefer to say Wheaton. It's more importantly, it's from Wheaton.
From Wheaton.
The greater Chicago area.
Yeah, the greater Chicago area. I guess it depends on who you talk to about whether or not you want to let them to know you're from Wheaton. But nonetheless, we perhaps should stray into that at the moment.
We have time for that later.
Skye, you've spent much of your career as a pastor in the evangelical world. And Phil, you're perhaps something like royalty in many evangelical homes as the creator of VeggieTales. And yet, in recent years, both of you have spent a lot of your energy and your work towards mostly critical commentary on the intersection of evangelicalism and socio-political issues. So tell us how and why from that to this. Skye, you want to start?
Sure. I don't think it was a huge shift for me. I wasn't really raised entirely within evangelicalism. My father's an immigrant from India. I had a lot of exposure to diverse religious backgrounds. My family from India is mostly Hindu. I was educated and trained and eventually working within the evangelical subculture, but it wasn't indigenous to me necessarily. So I always kind of had a critical eye towards evangelicalism. And then when we started this podcast back in 2012, it was a natural topic, both kind of the quirkiness of the evangelical subculture and then some of the inconsistencies. And obviously in the last 10 years, we've seen some really dramatic shifts in its political posturing, its cultural dynamic, the way it views itself within a diverse pluralistic culture. And so we have become more and more focused on what does it mean to live faithfully as a Christian in today's world, and when necessary, critiquing the subculture which we are a part of when it departs from that. So I don't want to speak for Phil, but I think as we've seen more and more of that departure, it's become more and more of a focus of our energy and our conversation.
Phil, how about you? How and why from there to here?
Yeah, from there to here. I was driving to and from my office, listening to NPR. This is 2011 and 2012, and finding myself often in dialogue with the hosts of NPR on various topics, and thinking, well, there's a Christian perspective on this that's not being incorporated. Boy, I wish I could incorporate a Christian perspective on this story, or what's going on in the world right now. And it just occurred to me at one point, I wonder if other people would get any benefit from hearing the conversations I'm having with myself in my car. And I thought about, before I launched VeggieTales, Mike Naraki and I actually pitched the idea of doing a talk show, a Christian talk show, kind of for teens and young adults. That at the time, it would have been modeled after like David Letterman, who was one of my heroes at the time. And we pitched that idea around to a couple of Christian publishers who just looked at us like we were, crazy. Like, what? No, that's not a thing. And then that's when I thought, okay, well, maybe I just need to try, because I was an animator, but that seemed like way harder than doing a talk show. So I thought, well, I'll start with animation then. I'll just go to the hard stuff. So then post Veggies, I started thinking, well, maybe I should go back and actually try to do that talk show I always wanted to do. So we put something together, and I asked Skye if he would be like my sidekick on the talk show, like my Andy Richter or my Ed McMahon, because he could keep me out of theological trouble because he has a seminary degree. And he's a pastor, and and he's bald, so he looks smart and brave. And the talk show didn't really go anywhere. We recorded a couple episodes, and it was like, does anybody No? Anybody anywhere want one of these? No? Oh, okay. But at the same time, we had a couple of guests in town for the first episodes of the talk show. And I thought, well, why don't we just record a podcast with those guests? I think Oz Guinness was one of the first ones. And you'll get a kick out of this. Eric Metaxas was one of the first guests.
I think he was the first.
He may have been the first guest for the talk show. So we started recording podcast episodes, and turns out that was a lot easier to do than a talk show, trying to do it with a live studio audience. So we stuck with the podcast. And at first, it was interesting to see how it evolved, because at first it was, it's the VeggieTales guy. He's doing a podcast. I like VeggieTales. I'll listen to the podcast. And so I'd start every episode, with singing the theme song in a different character's voice from VeggieTales. And, I love it. And then they'd write in and say, what about this character? Can you do this? So that ran for a while. But then things started to develop. MAGA developed, and evangelicals started flocking to Donald Trump and the MAGA movement in ways that really caught us off guard. Like, we just did not see that coming. And that immediately became, we need to talk about this. And once that happened, a lot of the just plain old, I'm here to hear him do funny VeggieTales voices, a lot of that audience said, wait a minute, I don't think they like the way I'm headed in my politics. I'm out. So we probably lost half our audience just as it became clear we were not fans of what was happening with evangelicals and politics. But then we got to fast forward to 2020 and George Floyd, and how are we responding to the summer of 2020? And I put out a video on an explainer video on race, kind of trying to explain 100 years of racial history in America in 17 minutes. And it went viral and was watched, 7 million times, just unexpectedly out of the blue. And we found a whole new audience. A couple things happened. I heard people say, hey, the creator of VeggieTales is woke. And I thought, oh, this is a new term. I'm not familiar with this term. I wonder what it means. And I looked it up and it's like, oh, well, that's, and it was usually African-Americans who were saying that. And I thought, oh, that's great. That's a compliment. This is great. And then probably just 2 weeks later, maybe just 2 weeks later, I heard somebody on social media say, hey, the VeggieTales creator is woke. And it wasn't a compliment anymore. And I thought, wow, this is really interesting what's just happened here. And suddenly we were not only was everyone not a fan of me, but there was a pretty sizable contingent of people who started to strongly dislike me and come after me. And that helped us kind of define who we were, but also who we weren't, and that we were going to be what we felt was a healthy remnant of Christians looking at politics and engaging in politics in a healthy way. And over the couple of years after 2020, we've ended up with just tons of pastors, coming up to us, often privately, where no one can see them, and saying, thank you for what you're doing. You're keeping me from going crazy. I no longer know how to relate to my own congregation because of the politics that have infected the white evangelical church. But I have found solace that there are other people that are wrestling with the same things, and you guys are bringing those conversations to us. So it's become kind of a mission, and I've described it for the podcast as there are kids standing at the back door of the church saying, give me one reason not to walk out. Just give me one reason not to leave. And that it's our mission to say, hang on, just give us a sec. Just sit down, listen to a conversation. And I think we can give you a reason to maybe walk away from some of the cultural trappings of your faith, but not walk away from your faith.
At what point do you think you began to really say, okay, some things are changing here that cause us significant discomfort? Can you identify any particular story or turning point there in the Was it, you said between 2012 and 2016, or what precisely kind of made you think, oh, wait a second, something's different?
For me, while Skye thinks of a much better answer, for me, it was just waking up after the election in 2016 and learning that 81% of white evangelicals had supported Donald Trump. Who came down the escalator to tell us that immigrants were evil, were rapists and criminals, and that we needed to build a wall all the way across the southern border to keep out all the rapists and criminals that Mexico is boxing up and mailing to us. And, when he said that, my first thought was, well, he's done. He's done. America, we will not abide by someone who is that openly demeaning of immigrants, especially Christians who, welcome the foreigner and the stranger. And so it was the shock to find out that, in fact, 82% of us happily abided that, that really, it's like, okay, we can't not talk about this. This is something significant.
Skye, what about you?
It was a similar time frame. I think a lot of us in 2015, 2016 saw Donald Trump as an anomaly, and we knew that there were going to be some television characters within the church who were going to gravitate toward him. And Phil's right. When the numbers came out and it was 80+%, that was surprising. But it didn't – that isn't what did it for me. What did it for me was shortly after the election, I wrote a piece in which I expressed some of my shock at the – not just the willingness to vote for Donald Trump, but the full-throated endorsement of Donald Trump after the Access Hollywood tape and things like that. And at that time in my career, I had left my post at Christianity Today. I was independent, and I was relying a lot on speaking invitations. And I was speaking all over the country, different churches, schools, conferences, universities. And I had more than a fair number of speaking invitations rescinded. Because it wasn't because I had changed my faith. It wasn't because I had changed my theology. It wasn't because I had deviated in any way from my Christian values or principles. It was because I dared criticize Donald Trump and the way he spoke about women. And so that's what surprised me, is I was now blacklisted in some circles simply because I didn't endorse Donald Trump. And that's what I found disheartening, because it was no longer just some of the crazier voices in Christian television who were backing this guy, but ordinary churches, institutions, denominations, schools, and this is certainly not everybody, but enough that it caught my attention. And I realized, oh, this virus has spread a lot further than I expected.
So I think that I've heard the phrase in doing interviews with certain evangelicals, Phil, I think that's the third time I've heard somebody say Donald Trump came down the escalator. And that's usually used as a sort of way of saying there's this serious discontinuity between who we were, the social cultural moment we were in, and now the new social cultural moment. But I wonder sometimes, does that kind of way of framing it lead us or lead evangelicalism to overlook the continuities? So let me put that in terms of a question. Now that you've been doing this kind of critique for 8 years or 8+ years, what would you say are actually the continuities between who American evangelicals were and are with who they still are that perhaps set them up to be recipients of what seems to be such a change and departure with Donald Trump?
Phil?
This week on our show, I think I talked about the through line from Charles Lindbergh's nativism in the 1920s to Pat Buchanan's nativism in the 1990s to Donald Trump's nativism today, and recognizing that big parts of white Christianity were on board all the way through that. That was, I had a bunch of people on the thing formerly known as Twitter very angry with me for posting a picture of a Klan march where they were all marching under the banner America First, and just said, if you share a slogan with these folks, you might want to rethink some things. And people went nuts because in their minds, those are completely unrelated. Like America First today has nothing to do with America First in the 1920s. Nothing to do. And in reality, no, it's focusing on the three same things: protectionism, isolationism, and nativism. And different groups gravitate towards different, economic motivated people might gravitate more towards the protectionism. But the heart of American white Christianity has always been the Bible Belt, and the geographic proximity of the Bible Belt to the secessionist states. The reality is the South was built on a plantation economy. Plantation economies required very strict hierarchies. So the church in the South focused on the strict hierarchies they could find in the Bible and emphasized those above all. And when you get into nativism, when you get into gender roles, when you get into who's in, who's out, who's supposed to be in charge, who isn't supposed to be in charge, there's always been an element of white Christianity in America that was fighting for the status quo and using the Bible to do it. So I think the through line is, yes, generally in America, white Christians have been in power and have resented any threat to that power, whether white Protestants, so whether it was Catholics coming from Italy and Ireland, or whether it was Eastern Europeans coming in the 19-teens, 1920s, or whether it's brown people coming from the southern border today. There is a through line of white Christians resenting an intrusion on what they believe to be the way America was intended to be.
Skye, what about you?
Yeah, I concur with Phil's kind of historical analysis. Let me give you a little bit more of a ecclesiastical or theological analysis. I think Donald Trump embodies a lot of the values that have been inculcated within evangelical churches for decades. I think it was Russell Moore. We had him on our show probably in 2016, 2017, and he pointed out to me that Donald Trump is essentially a televangelist right down to the hair. Like he has that vibe, but he embodies a couple of qualities that you see in evangelical churches going all the way back. One is celebrity. We tend to create celebrity pastors. We build megachurches around single personalities who are dynamic presences on a platform. Secondly, he embodies prosperity. The prosperity gospel in various forms infiltrates an awful lot of American evangelicalism. There are the extreme versions, sort of the health and wealth gospel, but there are more subtle versions, which is the idea that I'm going to come to Jesus and I'm going to use the Bible and its principles in order to make my life better. And Donald Trump is I don't know how much money he actually has, but he embodies this prosperity ethic that a lot of American Christianity really, really gravitates towards. And then the third one is, at least since the 1980s, maybe even earlier, there has been this fascination, especially in the Pentecostal end of evangelicalism, but throughout the whole thing now, towards spiritual warfare. This notion that we are engaged in some sort of cosmic battle between good and evil, between angels and demons. And that black and white way of thinking is epitomized by Donald Trump's rhetoric, where you are either with him or you're against him. There are good guys and bad guys, and there's no gray area. There's no room for compromise. It's all or nothing. All of those values have been in American evangelicalism for decades before Donald Trump came down the escalator, but he embodied them more than any other political leader in my lifetime. And looking back now, I realize, that's why he was so attractive to this community. They were primed to accept a leader like him.
Yeah, I would probably add, we won't have time to talk about it right now, but I would just kind of make a note that I would probably add as well to both of the things that you both have said, this sort of thread of imperialism that's inseparable from all that you've said, right? So there's a sort of, going back to Constantine, right? You have this sort of move in which the church makes a significant change in which it says we're going to use the power of the nation state or the power of the empire to impose our values on everybody else around us. And once you make that move, it has centuries of ripple effect. And I think that's one of the ones that in our current context of conversation where we're trying to do a lot of self-examination, I think that's one that typically gets overlooked because there are a lot more acceptable versions of that, say, in the 1960s and 70s and 80s than the shape it's taking now. But it seems to me that that's one of the underlying roots as well that gets overlooked a lot.
Lee, that's a really good point. And I think the difference is in the 70s, 80s, and even in the 90s, there was still a shared view among white evangelicals that they were the majority. I mean, they even, they call themselves the moral majority. And so if you're the majority, then what you need to do is just defend your majority, defend the position that you hold, focus on the family, did a lot of this, you're protecting these stances. But in the 2000s, and certainly by 2015, 2016, there was a sense of, wait a minute, maybe we're not the majority anymore. Maybe we're actually the minority, in which case we can no longer take a defensive posture. We have to take an offensive posture. And the rhetoric shifts from defending traditional values, quote unquote, to, seven mountain dominionism, where only certain kinds of Christians should be able to take over the whole government and forget about democracy. We're going to impose a red Caesar over everybody because that's the only way to protect a minority position if you can't win at the ballot box anymore. And I think that minority posture, that fear posture, has completely changed the rhetoric in evangelical political circles.
Yeah, thank you. So let me move to this question. What have you done internally with yourself around two questions? One, anxiety and fear just with regard to being critiqued publicly a lot. And second, about when you speak up and about something and when you don't speak up about something.
Oh, gee.
What's that awkward laugh mean, Phil?
Can we take those one at a time?
Sure. Let's start with it. Let's start with the second one. What's the internal work look like for when you speak up about something and when you don't speak up about something?
Oh, yeah, that's a good. I don't know that I have a good answer for that. I think I've just kind of feel it out on an issue by issue basis. There is a sense of respecting your audience, saying who is my audience and what are their needs, and does me taking a position on tariffs help them? Because I'm not going to take a whole lot of stands on economic issues unless it's impacting the poor in a very clear way. So I am taking a very loud stand on the pullback of U.S. aid overseas and the pullback on the support for refugee resettlement. I'm basically going to the mat on those, and people are trying to cancel me and say he's an idiot, and I'm never let your kids watch VeggieTales because he's an idiot, and I'll take that. I'll take that because that's important enough. Whether you tariff steel at 5% or 25% is like, that's not that important to our audience. It's not helping people. It's not either pushing people further away from the church or pulling them in for the wrong reasons, So for me, there is a sense of personal cost. Is there a point where I can just no longer work in the Christian world? Because I don't get my majority of my income from podcasting. I don't know about you, maybe you're really raking in the bucks off podcasting. But I still, the majority of my income is actually the work I enjoy more, which is teaching the Bible to kids. So, and I have had people come after my kids' work because they don't like stances I've taken about Donald Trump, and will show up online to try to get other people to boycott my kids' work. And that's troubling because that's becoming, really personal to the work that's core to me. But in general, if it helps our audience, I want to show up there.
Yeah, Skye.
Yeah, I agree with Phil. One of the challenges we face at Holy Post Media in general is it's not just picking what issues do we want to speak up about, but what's the right setting and forum in which to speak up about them. I mean, some things are easy and relatively quickly identified as problematic. I mean, when Phil made that video about race in America in 2020, in 17 minutes, he covered a lot of history that I think a lot of white Americans didn't know. And I don't want to assume motivations for you, Phil, but I think you were seeing the reactions to the George Floyd murder and BLM and some of this stuff, and felt like there's a clear Christian message here about the equal dignity of all people that we need to stand for. That's fairly easy to identify. Or when Donald Trump is, calling immigrants vermin, or they're poisoning the blood of America, whatever, like those are fairly easy things to identify and deal with. But then there are other issues that are really complicated and really hard. And it isn't that we won't take a stand on them. It's just we realize you can't cover this in a 5 or 10 minute explainer video. You can't do this in a social media clip. It takes a lot of conversation. So one example was the war in Israel with Gaza, like an incredibly long history led up to that war, and it's complicated even now. And we had multiple guests on different programs for extended interviews looking at it from multiple sides. You can't just do that in a 15-minute conversation. And so we want to respect our audience by one of the things we say all the time here is nuance is not a dirty word. Mm. And to get into the nuances of some of these issues requires space and time and experts. And that's not the world we live in on social media that just wants sound bites and quick answers and no thoughtfulness. So we're trying to respect our audience by not just taking a stand on everything that can be captured in a sound bite.
Yeah. I also started out thinking naively that if I can just explain this position, other people will say, "Oh, you're right. I see it clearly now. Thank you." And it really was the race video, because the first wave of responses to the race video were, "Oh, this is fantastic. This is so useful. I feel like I can share this with my conservative friends because it's coming from the creator of VeggieTales, and that they will actually sit down and listen to this." But it very quickly hit a point where other Christians were making videos to attempt to debunk it on YouTube, including one, guy who made a 2-hour debunking video for my 17-minute historical video. And there was, I was surprised with how much effort some people invested in saying, you don't have to listen to this. You can stay in your current way of thinking about Black people. So I've learned how deeply dug in so many people are in their positions, and that simply showing up with a smile and a rational argument, it's just not going to work with a lot of people. So I've had to step back, particularly from social media, from engaging and thinking, oh, well, what they're saying is clearly wrong. I will step in and I will give them the correct data, and then they will join me in right thinking.
Yeah.
And it doesn't work. It doesn't work because particularly on Twitter, people that are on Twitter because they enjoy throwing anger at other people. That's the payoff is the anger. Yeah. So trying to reason them out of their anger, it's insane. Yeah. It's like trying to take a bone from a very large angry dog. It's
those are year
helpful.
One college teaching lessons as well. I learned a long time ago. Yeah. The high view that we have of rationality doesn't withstand the pragmatic realities, does it? So let's go to that other question about what kind of internal work you have had to do to navigate critique and criticism, fear, courage and cowardice, or recklessness. Skye?
Yeah, I've had to go, I've kind of had to swing in the other direction of, engaging in all criticism to engaging in almost none, which also isn't good because some of the criticism is valid, and you want to hear valid criticism. But when it's coming from strangers, the ratio of valid to just angry, is so slanted in the favor of just angry, and I don't care about you, and I'm not bringing a thoughtful critique. I want to. We have a national mood of destroying the other side. We must, and it's on both sides. I must own the libs. I must show how stupid conservatives are. And it's not about I must reason with them. I must get to know them. I must invite them over for dinner. No, I must destroy them. And when you realize the percentage of the people that are angry with you on Twitter, especially when something spreads, and other louder voices pick it up and then spread it to their followers, is sport. They're coming at you in sport. And it is so not spiritually beneficial, psychically beneficial, even physically beneficial to try to engage with that much vitriol that I had to step back all the way and say, I really can't engage at all in this medium. I'm no longer looking at it as an interactive medium. I'm looking at it as simply a publishing platform that I'll drop statements every now and then go back to my regular life, which is much healthier. But I do miss out on the honest interactions from people that want to bring an honest critique. I've just decided social media, these aren't the platforms for honest interactions. So let's have coffee instead.
Yeah. Skye?
Yeah. I'm more disconnected from social media than Phil has been. I've long ago found very little benefit to it, but just a recent example, and this doesn't affect us directly, but some very prominent voices in Christian MAGA world have been accusing non-MAGA Christian voices and platforms of taking money from USAID. And it's absolutely ludicrous. I think Christianity Today, for example, was accused of this, and the president, Tim Dalrymple, had to issue a statement saying, no, we don't take any money from USAID. But the posture from some of the folks on that side is it doesn't matter if an accusation is true or not. If it feels right, if we're going to use it to bludgeon people we don't like. And Phil and I have certainly been on the receiving end of that. There's no way to reason with that. And was it Upton Sinclair who said that it's very difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on him not understanding it? There are people making a lot of money on the MAGA side of this thing, and they grow their audience by attacking people. And whether those attacks are legitimate or not is irrelevant. They will do it. So I've kind of given up on any of that. But for my own well-being, I think part of what prepared me for some of this is going back to my background. I didn't grow up in a home where there was a united set of beliefs, a united outlook on things. When I made the decision to go to seminary and become a pastor, I had to battle with my dad for months about that. And we have a very good relationship, but like I was formed in those years to know what it was like to stand by my beliefs and convictions and not please the people around me. And I think that prepared me in a way to do that now in this era when I make a stand about, I think it's wrong to sexually assault women, and I don't think that qualifies you to be president of the United States, and I lose speaking invitations as a result, I kind of have an attitude of, I think that's more of an indictment of them than me. So I try to keep myself centered on what I see in the person of Jesus, what I know he's called me to be and do, and I fail at that regularly. But the last thing in the world I want to say is that I'm going to be bullied by an anonymous mob of social media trolls to be and do something that is utterly out of sync with who I know God has called me to be. And that's what we're looking for anybody who's going to have a voice with Holy Post Media. And I'm grateful that I have colleagues who share those convictions.
Yeah.
I'm Shankar Vedantam, here to tell you about a great mystery. That mystery is you. As the host of a podcast called Hidden Brain, I explore big questions about what it means to be human. Questions like, where do our emotions come from? Why do so many of us feel overwhelmed by modern life? How can we better understand the people around us? Discover your hidden brain. Find us wherever you get your podcasts.
We are most excited to announce that we'll be having our second NSC Plus book club with an author on June 26 at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. Professor Rebecca DeYoung will join us to discuss her book, Glittering Vices. It's a great book. Order your copy of the book and mark your calendars. If you're not yet a member of NSC Plus, join at the link in the show notes or visit nosmallendeavor.com and click Join NSC Plus. Show up with questions and get ready to sit in on a great conversation. Speaking of Holy Post Media, one of your values is funny and thinky. And obviously, clearly, humor has been a key part in what you all are trying to do. But why funny and thinky together? And talk a little bit about the function or purpose of humor for you all.
They're together because that's who I am. I like thinking and I like funnying. I like both of those things, and I like putting them together because the humor disarms people, and then you it's easier to engage with Thinky if you made them laugh. Because there's a gazillion position papers, there's a gazillion think tanks, there's a gazillion dissertations that have been written that are sitting on shelves that have wonderfully valuable data and information in them that 99% of humanity will never know, never interact with in any way, shape, or form. But if Stephen Colbert has Francis Collins on to talk about his book, The Language of God, a whole bunch of people learn about the language of God, according to Francis Collins, because it was couched in the humor of Stephen Colbert. So I'm much more attracted to that. I'm not going to go out and develop brand new theories that no one has ever heard of that are remarkable and should be written up in dissertations and published in academic journals. That's not me. But I can understand that stuff, and I can read that stuff if I want to. I don't really want to because it's boring. And then I can simplify it and make it much more palatable to, enjoy.
Yeah.
I can't not put those two together.
I think when we were getting this whole thing started back in 2012, around that time, there was a study that came out that said the most trusted news anchor in America was Jon Stewart from Comedy Central. And I'm not here to, judge whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I think what it showed is that Americans are more likely to engage, as Phil said, this important content if it's packaged with a sense of humor. And I think a lot of people came into the podcast initially knowing Phil and knowing VeggieTales and assuming that Phil's a funny guy because he does voices of vegetables and silly songs and stuff like that, and may have been a little bit surprised to discover how smart he is and the depth with which he can examine different topics. And I think when Phil invited me to be a part of this whole thing, because of my background at CT and the books I'd published, people just said, well, Skye's more theologically trained. He's the smarter kind of voice in this whole thing. And then we're surprised to discover that sometimes my humor could be more juvenile than Phil's. And so the combination of the two of us, and we were friends for years before we ever did this together, like that, the humor and intelligence were always part of the mix with both of us, and it would be disingenuous to not have that be central to the show.
Now, clearly, there's different kinds of humor, right? There's disarming humor, but there's also satire and there's also sarcasm. How do you all think about what's off limits with regard to humor?
I try not to use humor as a weapon, weaponized humor, where you are lobbing an arrow at someone and saying it's okay because it was funny. Ha! And I have a tendency, I can do that because I'm sarcastic, and I grew up as a student of David Letterman and the sarcastic generation that decided not to take anything seriously. But for me, what I tried to do with VeggieTales was to be sincere about deep, deep truths in a way that the generation raised on David Letterman could accept. Because when you've raised a generation, because we were the generation that looked at Barney the dinosaur and thought, oh, no. I cannot let him near my children because Barney the dinosaur never winks at the audience. He is 100% sincere all the time with no sense of humor. There's no, I need at least a little Pee Wee Herman mixed in with my Barney the dinosaur or I'm out. And that's what I was, and it's the same thing with Christian content is that you can have a sermon and give that to your kids, and make them listen to it because it's family devotion time, but it's not going to stick because it's not fun to participate in. There's no enjoyment in it. There's no enjoyment. Joy isn't a sin, it's a fruit of the Spirit. So why don't we employ it more when we're trying to pass things on to our kids and even to our neighbors? So that's what I try to do is like, let's make sure first that you're enjoying this interaction. And then secondarily, that you're bumping into good, healthy theology, good, healthy modeling of interactions. And that's also why I avoid aggressive humor, because it isn't good modeling, even though it's funny. So I can watch South Park and say, that's hilarious, and also say, and I'm never going to make anything even remotely like that. Because it's not the message. It's not the presence I want to be in the world.
And I think another piece of this is when you look at evangelical media broadly, it tends to take itself very, very, very seriously. And a lot of it is filled with anger and fear. The world is a dangerous place. The diversity of our society is incredibly threatening to a lot of Christians. You need to hunker down. You need to circle the wagons. You need to protect yourself. And with Holy Post Media, we're trying to create content that faithfully presents what it means to be a Christian, but not to see the world as a dangerous and threatening place, but to believe that you can engage in a pluralistic culture without fear and anger. And so by using humor, you can't really use humor if you think the world is about to destroy you, if you think you're under attack, if you think you're under siege. It's not a place for humor. So it isn't just that humor helps people engage the meaningful content that we want. It's not just the sugar that helps the medicine go down. Humor in and of itself is an antidote to the fear and anger that is filling way too much of the American church today. And if people see in us and our colleagues on other shows that we can laugh at ourselves, we can enjoy this thing, we can poke fun at things that are going on in the world, we can still be joyful, then maybe we're going to be okay. Maybe what God has to say about never leaving us or forsaking us is true. Maybe we aren't really under threat by all the changes going on in the society. And so for me, it's a strategic antidote to what we see in so much of Christian media today.
So let's talk about, go from humor to justice a moment. I mean, I would assume that
justice isn't very funny, but we still need it.
Yeah. So I can imagine that you all get a lot of being written off as progressives or liberals because you talk about justice so much. And Skye, you have a recent book out entitled "What If Jesus Was Serious About Justice?" So,
which is full of cartoons, by the way.
Oh, is it really?
Yes, so it's serious, but not that serious.
Not that serious. Not that serious.
All his books, all his books are full cartoons, of his doodles.
So let's do an experiment. Let me ask you to give us one sentence in answer to this question. What would you think is the most important thing to say to the Christian world about justice for you right now? What one sentence about what you think is the most important thing to say about justice to the Christian world?
Wow. Okay. Most important thing to say about justice: if you have removed justice from your practice of Christianity, then you are not following Jesus Christ.
Phil?
And I would say the same thing, but funnier.
Well, go ahead. We're giving you the opportunity, Phil.
Justice isn't, you can't necessarily say justice is the gospel, but it is part of the gospel, and it is an outflow of the gospel in you. There is no Christianity without social implication. So you can't, I've said this before, you can't Christian alone. Mm-hmm. It's impossible. And when you Christian in community, justice happens.
Yeah.
I think Phil did use at least a semicolon and multiple uses of
5 commas, 3 M dashes, and a semicolon.
Right, Go ahead, Skye.
Well, there's that well-known story in the Gospels of an expert in the religious law coming to Jesus and asking him, what's the most important commandment? And even though he's asking for one, Jesus responds with 2. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. He responds with 2 because it's deeply rooted in the Hebrew Bible that it is, and this is not an overstatement, it is impossible to worship and honor God without honoring and serving and loving those made in his image. They are always connected in the Jewish scriptures. They're always connected in the Torah. They're always connected in the words of the prophets. And Jesus is just echoing that tradition. And so what I think has happened in a lot of white American Christianity is we've tried to separate those two things. We think it's entirely possible to honor God, love God, and be devoted to God, and yet demonize whole groups of people that we disagree with or treat them as subhuman. And there's a reason we do that in American Christianity. It's because of our history, and we can get into that if you want. But that bifurcation, we've put asunder what God said not to. Like, we've broken that link. And that's why I say you can't really be a follower of Jesus and not care about justice, because throughout the Bible, from beginning to end, they are inseparable.
Yeah. It's pretty fascinating too to think about in the Sermon on the Mount that you could just as easily translate the verse, "Seek ye first the kingdom of God and its righteousness," as "Seek ye first the kingdom of God and its justice." Those words can go.
It's the same word. Yeah,
right?
Both in Hebrew and Greek, the words for righteousness and justice are the same. And I don't know any evangelical community in America that says we shouldn't care about righteousness.
Yeah.
But some will flat out say justice is not part of our faith.
Yeah. All right, so let's switch the thought experiment. One sentence, and Phil, not so many independent clauses strung together this time.
Can't help myself.
One sentence on what would you want most to say to the non-Christian world about justice?
It's deeply Christian.
Well done, Phil. Nailed the assignment. Okay, my turn. I can't beat 3 words, that's for sure.
Yeah, I know. Thank you. Do a haiku.
Right. What would I want the non-Christian world to know about justice? Justice is about the right ordering of relationships so that everyone can flourish. And one of those critical relationships for human flourishing is our relationship with our Creator. So let's not forget about that part as well.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks.
If you keep saying "and," you can keep the ball bouncing forever.
That's right.
Phil says, as the master of the and. Yes.
And also.
Have you all had on your show Musa Al-Garbi yet?
No.
Musa has gotten a splash for his book, We Have Never Been Woke. And Musa was raised Christian, Republican, Arizona, military family. And now he's a Muslim, kind of progressive. But his one way I would summarize the critique he does in that book, We've Never Been Woke, is to say that a lot of people who have microphones and who have public pens and public platforms that talk about things that would be considered progressive and care about people on the margins, that provides them a way of accumulating to themselves greater social capital through what he calls symbolic capitalism. And so when I asked him, okay, so what you Musa, you clearly care about these issues and you care about these people. So what would you want us to keep in mind that maybe we're not keeping in mind? And he said, I would want you to keep in mind the constant question of, is the work that I'm doing making a material difference for the people that I say I care about? How do you respond to that?
Well, if I can summarize what I think I heard you say, it's talk is cheap.
Yeah, I think that's one good way to put it. Yeah.
Talk is cheap and actions are what matter. In Matthew 15, Jesus says to the religious leaders, quoting Isaiah, these people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. And what he means thereby in the context is they're not actually caring for, in this case, the elderly, but they're not caring for the marginalized, the poor. They say all the right things, but they're not doing it. And I think that's a risk of any of us who have a pen or a microphone, who are professional communicators. We can honor God with our lips, but our hearts, our actions can be far from it. And that's something I have to be reminded of constantly. It's why being part of a Christian church community is so important, because that's where kind of the rubber hits the road. It's why my family and marriage are important. It's why my community is important. It's why what I choose to contribute my money to is important, because that's where the heart is. That's where the action is. And as much as I feel called to this work of writing and speaking and communicating, and I want to inspire other people, if I'm not doing it myself, as Paul would say, I can teach others how to run after the prize and be disqualified myself. Yeah.
But it's also a critique of the great divide that happened in the early 20th century, where the progressives took the social gospel and the conservatives took the spiritual gospel, and they each decided the one was all they needed. So saving souls, and this is also in the fallout of premillennial dispensationalism and the decision that, in fact, the rapture is imminent, so social issues don't even matter. So there was a great cleaving by conservative evangelicals of the social from the spiritual, with the social deemed a waste of time, polishing the brass on the Titanic, as it was said, when we need to be filling the lifeboats because the ship's going down. So there are a lot of people that are trying to undo that damage, when the progressives ran off with the concerns of the world and the conservatives thought only of heaven.
Skye, you've mentioned the way you think your childhood experience has shaped you. Any other observations about the way your early experience has equipped you well to do the work that you're doing?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, we could turn this into a therapy session. I mean, one thing I'm grateful for this is my parents really dragged me all over the world, me and my brother all over the world when we were kids. I think by the time I graduated high school, I'd been to about 30 countries.
Oh, wow.
And like I said earlier, being exposed to so many different religious traditions and cultures and seeing and then coming back. And my mom tried to raise us within a Baptist church in our area. And so I saw that community. There were wonderful people there too. But one of the things that it helped me realize is, and I ended up writing a book about this, the way that a lot of the different religious traditions that I had been exposed to all share a common origin and a lot of factors in common. So like when I go to India and visit my family there and I'd see the way they practice their Hinduism, and then I come back to the Baptist church outside Chicago and see the way they were practicing their things and realizing, oh, wait a minute, they're both really rooted in fear and superstition. It's just one looks one way and one looks another. I ended up studying comparative religion as an undergrad in college, and so through all of that, I think it just gave me a healthy, critical eye toward that, and an ability to then cut through it and see how is the message of Jesus actually different, and where does even the church in America not get it right, and where are they just basically doing the same thing as any other human religion rooted in fear? And so that early exposure, I think, helped me. And then the disunity of my family, the fact that my parents didn't share the same beliefs, meant at an early age, I and my brother along with me, we both had to discern earlier, what do we really think? Because in a unified home, you can say, well, this is what I've always known, this is what my family's always believed, this is what we've always taught. In a disunited home, you got to think for yourself. Do I agree with mom? Do I agree with dad? Do I agree with neither of them? Why? What's my argument? So I had to wrestle with all that stuff at a much earlier age than some of my peers. And I think more people hit those questions maybe in high school or later in college or even early adulthood. And I was hitting them in high school. And so all of that prepared me to be more critical about what I'm thinking. And I've always been a skeptic. And so the ability to then turn that lens towards American Christianity or American evangelicalism is not difficult because I've been doing it since I was probably 13 years old.
Yeah. And so, Phil, while Skye was doing comparative religion in his early 20s, you were deciding that your path to lifelong success was animated puppets?
No, just animation.
Just animation.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, being Walt Disney.
Yeah. Being Walt Disney.
My path.
And looking back, I mean, you've publicly talked about the great rapid rise and the immense success that you all have had with VeggieTales and Big Idea Productions, and then you've also publicly talked about the bankruptcy that occurred. But as you look back at that phase of your work, what would you say would be one of the things constructively that you've carried with you that you thought I learned something there that has been a crucial good, and then what maybe have been one lesson that you learned out of that that you thought I don't want to do that again?
Well, there's a whole lot I don't want to do again. So there's way more than one thing. I feel like I've spent 5 years learning what I was good at, and then 5 years learning what I was not good at. And ultimately, it would have been nice to learn those in the other order. Because when you start out being really successful at the first thing you're trying to do, the assumption is that I do things successfully, and you don't realize, well, you do a certain set of things successfully, and the more you go outside that set and attempt, and you make those things critical to your doing other unrelated things successfully, you can bring down the whole ship pretty easily. What I learned is, I think what I've known my whole life is that I just love to make things. There's just a joy in creation. And it doesn't have to, it was like my upbringing was very evangelical and very missions oriented. My great grandfather was the first non-denominational radio preacher in America, and he traveled the world and preached in China in the 50s and, did just all sorts of crazy stuff. And I have lots of missionaries in my background. So growing up, there was always this focus on, is the thing you're doing eternally valuable? And the way eternal value was measured in, does it bring people to a decision point for following Jesus? And if it doesn't, if what you're doing doesn't bring people to a decision point in following Jesus, then it's not eternally valuable. And so it took a long time for me to just, kind of feel God's pleasure in me being silly, for example, if the silly doesn't lead to a conversion. And so I'm enjoying that more, like just the pleasure of making things. And I try to avoid the lie of thinking the things I make don't matter if they don't have huge impact. You can make small things and still enjoy the process. And God isn't disappointed if the thing you make is small. And that took a while to learn that.
Yeah, that's lovely. And I understand that you also got yourself thrown out of Bible college with our mutual friend Mike Naraki.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, for skipping chapel.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So they've changed it. Like if you're at Liberty now, or I think a number of other Christian colleges, if you skip chapel, they charge you money. You pay a fine. So they've turned
commodification of everything continues to triumph.
Yes, they've turned oversleeping into a revenue source. Whereas in my days at Bible, it's like bank fees.
Yeah.
It's like, we're going to have to, hey, we're making more money off these overdraft fees than we are from our banking activities.
Yeah.
Let's crank them up 5% every year. So that's what we're doing now with chapel attendance.
Yeah.
But in my day, if you missed more than, I think it was 17 chapels in a semester, and you did that 2 semesters in a row, you couldn't come back the third semester. So they lost money. It was a terrible idea.
Yeah,
they lost money on it.
Yeah,
Fortunately, the Falwell family has corrected that error.
Mike also told me that you all got early advice that Jesus could never be a vegetable.
My mother had 3 rules for VeggieTales.
Yeah.
My mother taught at the Wheaton grad school for 25 years in children's ministry. And so I said, I sat down with her when I was 24 years old, I think, sat down with my mother, said, all right, so I want to tell Bible stories with vegetables. Any advice? And she came back with 3 rules. She said, rule number 1, you will not portray Jesus as a vegetable. And I thought, well, there goes the New Testament. Rule number 2, you will not imply that vegetables can have redemptive relationships with Christ. Like, oh, okay, well, this is getting tricky. And that's why Bob and Larry never pray on the kitchen countertop when they're being Bob and Larry. They will pray when they're being a Bible character in a Bible story. Because we're not then implying that vegetables can have redemptive relationships with Christ. And the third rule, she said, was as often as you can, remind kids how special they are and how much God loves them.
Huh.
And so that's why every show ends with, remember kids, God made you special and he loves you very much. Goodbye.
I will say, just as an aside that I'm sure that we'll cut out, but Mike invited me to be a character in his new series, Dead Sea Squirrels.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, and I never could have been pleased to be a singing Pharisee.
You're singing Pharisee?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I'm a squirrel.
Squirrel, yeah.
I'm a side squirrel,
Yeah.
another different squirrel.
Yeah. So
to close, he wanted me to do Bob's voice and be a squirrel named Bob, and he would do Larry's voice and be a squirrel named Larry. And then he kind of got nervous at the very end, and so he flipped the names. So there's a squirrel named Larry that sounds just like Bob the Tomato, and a squirrel named Bob that sounds just like Larry.
So as we close, with all of the work that you've been doing in the world, What would you say has been some other key wisdom you've learned in doing your work and in being who you are in the world that you kind of find yourself going back to and saying, I need to remember this. I want to remember this. I want to practice this. What would be one or two key things that you're leaning into that space right now at this phase in your life?
For me, I think there was an evangelical workaholism in my upbringing that was really destructive to a lot of people. And it was all part of, the 20th century missions movement that was so driven by the concern of an imminent rapture that we may only have moments. We may only have moments. It could be tomorrow. So don't spend that time with your kids. Get out on the field. And I had relatives who left their kids with other relatives so they could go to the field full time, and their children would be raised, by other people. And I know the children who did not respond well to that situation. So looking back, for me, it was really hard to learn this, and I have to remind myself all the time. It's okay to enjoy your life. And it's okay to make choices in how you do your work that actually make your work more enjoyable for you. Because that felt selfish to me growing up. That I can't enjoy this because the world's going to hell in a handbag. So I just have to work myself to death to save as many as I can. And I mean, it's good to try to help as many people as you can. But again, joy is a fruit of the Spirit. If it's not there, something's wrong.
Yeah, beautifully said. Thank you. Skye?
Related to that, I share that to a degree. There's something my wife says regularly that our whole family knows well, and that is compare and despair. It's easy, obviously, especially when you're in a media setting like this where you can compare the impact you're having to other people, and I have to check that in my own tendencies. But going along with what Phil said, I have to regularly remind myself that God does not need me, but he does want me. And that shift, I think, is in my life as a Christian, that shift has been the most important in the maturing of my faith. And it helps me engage my work with more joy and with less burden, and abandoning the outcomes to God, as Dallas Willard likes to say. And a reminder that, if there's any God that needs me is not a God worthy of my worship, because that's a God far too small and pathetic to devote my life to. So he doesn't need me, but he does want me, and that changes everything. And it should change how all of us think about our work and the way we live our lives. But I don't think that's a message that many of us, we might be able to say it, but I think a lot of us struggle with really internalizing the implications of it.
Been talking to Phil Vischer and Skye Jethani, co-hosts of the Holy Post podcast. Phil and Skye, it's been great to be with you today. Thanks so much, and thanks for your work and the good work you're doing in the world. Thanks so much.
Thanks Lee.
For having us.
Hey friends, Lee Seacamp of No Small Endeavor here. Hey, would you like to expand the community of people talking about the things you like to talk about? Here is an easy way to do that. And I would be most grateful if you were to do so. Go over to your favorite podcast listening app, click on Reviews, and leave No Small Endeavor a glowing 5-star review. Tell folks perhaps about some episode you liked in particular, and tell folks what you like generally about No Small Endeavor. The topics, the dashingly handsome, articulate host, or whatever it is that floats your boat. That will help more people find us, which will expand the community of people talking about the things you like to talk about, especially when you make it one of those 5-star reviews. Thanks. Our thanks to all the stellar team that makes this show possible: Christy Bragg, Jacob Lewis, Sophie Byard, Kate Hayes, Mary Evelyn Brown, Carrie Harmon, Jason Cheesley, Audrey Griffith, and Tim Lauer. Thanks for listening, and let's keep exploring what it means to live a good life together. No Small Endeavor is a production of PRX, Tokens Media LLC, and
Great Feeling Studios.